Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Métis in Canada, the podcast. My name is Rob McDonald. We invite special guests to join us each week to talk about Métis people, the culture, the history, and of course, the current political state of affairs. Now, this week, I'm pleased to introduce to you Melanie Omeniho, who is the president of Les Femmes Michif Otipemisiwak, representing women across the homeland. And Melanie, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's really a pleasure having you here. And, you've been the president of Les Femmes Michif Otipemisiwak for a long period of time now. You've been doing some amazing work. Talk about the organization, the work that you're doing, some of the key issues that you're trying to deal with right now.
So, as Les Femmes Michif Otipemisiwak, we've existed since 2010, and there's a lot of amazing work that's being done all the time, and we are growing and becoming more and more active. I know that obviously one of the key things that we've worked on over the years is missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, as well as we've been dealing with things on the issues of environment, health, economic development, and uh, various opportunities in trying to build leadership amongst women and trying to lift the voice of Métis women so that the voices that are being heard about from Indigenous women just aren't coming from First Nations, but there also include Métis and Inuit women all the time. So, and we also do a significant amount of work to try to raise the voice and elevate the persona of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community that we have, and we work with a national committee so that they have their own voice as well as us.
Melanie, when it comes down to the topic of climate change, though, that is, one of the primary focuses that you've worked on over the last number of years here. And, you know, the indigenous community finds itself sort of on the front lines of climate change. But the thing is that communities, they recognize because they live off the land, they continue to work off the land, and tell us about what is happening in Métis communities across the country.
Well, I think that there are a lot of issues happening across Métis communities because as resource sectors continue to evolve and develop, more and more of our opportunities and our existence gets dwindled away and moved away from the opportunities that we have. And so I know we work very hard with other Métis women to make sure that we're acknowledging and recognizing how these things impact and affect us and what it is that we can do to help change it. And to try to advocate for the fact that we want to be able to see our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren live much like we have, knowing what our traditional medicines are. We've always been stewards of the land and people that wanted to protect the environment, and we need to continue to raise that and be able to tell our stories so that they don't get lost and that we don't continue to lose opportunities like we have in the past.
Climate change is impacting indigenous communities at an advanced rate, especially in northern regions, isolated regions, and you're seeing that. And it's interesting because I've heard story after story where youth are acting up and saying to the leadership, we need to do something. We need to act now. And they're coming up not only with their own ideas and solutions, they're actually leading the charge. And, tell us about the youth and their leadership when it comes down to attacking the issue of climate change in their communities.
Actually, Robert, it is amazing to watch some of our young people. They are well educated, they're knowledge and they're informed, and they want to make a change and they want to leave a better footprint and not have such a profound effect on our thing. So, and climate change is impacting people. Whether you're living in a rural environment or an urban environment, you can see elements of it everywhere and how our food sources have changed and what we're susceptible to, the kinds of viruses and things that are happening are all due to the changes in climate. Some of our people have been severely impacted by things like crazy floods and crazy fires that have happened that have taken out their homes and things. There just has been such dramatic changes in our environment, and even people that are very young notice how things have changed, how winters have changed, how the summers have changed, and they're talking about it, and they wanna know what they can do, and they wanna know why more isn't being done to make sure that there is an earth for their future generations too. So, and I'm very proud of some of our young people and how well educated they are and informed they are on the issues of climate change. We've taken some of those young women with us to the various COPs that we've been involved with, and we've had them had a voice at those and have been a part of the panels and things so that they can have their voices heard at those events.
I know that you were in Egypt last year with a Métis delegation, and then you had COP16 this year, which is the United Nations conference taking a look at climate change and the impacts of climate change. This year, I believe it was held in Colombia. How did that experience go? And last year, for example, there was a panel discussion that was hosted by the Métis delegation. Did you have a panel discussion this year as well?
Yes, we did. The challenge is, but the panel discussion that happened this year, as well as the one that we hosted in Egypt, was generally around the voice of Indigenous women, and we collectively worked with other Indigenous women to bring forward the issues of how climate change is impacting the lives of women. Because very often in the conversations when government starts negotiating and consulting with people on how climate change impacts them, they very often leave the women's voice out. So we want to make sure that young women have the opportunity to let governments and other people know how climate change impacts them and the things that they would like to see. So we had panels that involved other Indigenous women so that because other Indigenous women in other countries are experiencing even more radically some of the issues that we're experiencing. And we believe that if we collectively work together, maybe some of these other countries and governments will start to listen. But I have to be really honest with you, Robert. The the changes at COP are really, really tough, and it's hard to move anything forward. And the various major players in these various countries don't let us move the agenda forward very far, and they veto everything.
Yeah, that's disappointing. I've actually heard, I think it was COP29, as a matter of fact, they were on the verge of this whole session collapsing because nobody could agree. Was that the same situation at COP16?
Well, at COP16 wasn't quite as bad as that in Cali, but in Egypt, it was just as significant there, where many of them threatened to walk away and not continue to participate. And so it's really important for us, and we recognize that as Indigenous people, we have the least amount of voice in this game of anybody. So, for instance, in many of these countries, they don't acknowledge or recognize their Indigenous people. So, when we start having a stronger and more vibrant voice in the work that we're doing, other of these other countries actually come in opposition to having Indigenous even put within these documents. So, we see the challenges that exist, but we can't quit fighting. Regardless of what the outcome is or how challenging it is, we have to continue to try to move the issues forward. I know that there were a lot of significant things that happened in COP29. I know that that there was several times that the thing almost fell apart. But the reality is that it really was about the fact that less advantaged people are more impacted by some of the climate issues that are going on, and there's not the kind of regulatory systems within some of these countries to help them manage what's happening within the climate change. and the commitments for people to to have a to protect the water and to have a less of an impact on the environment are not being met. And countries that have the more opulent wealth to be able to help support the poorer countries are not willing to do so. But I do know as Indigenous people, one of the things that we said and are pushing forward is that not only do they have to help the poorer countries, they also have to provide capacity and infrastructure for Indigenous people to be engaged because very often we are the stewards of the land and we understand the historical effects of how climate has made a difference in many of our lives and how it directly impacts our health.
It's interesting too when you talk about the fact that, there are some countries that are continuing to be resistant, those countries that can't afford to help other countries. It's actually mind-boggling that they would. You take a look at some of the more recent things that have happened in our neighborhood when you talk about the two hurricanes that hit the very same area in the United States this year and the devastation that that caused. And all the experts are saying, that's a good example of what climate change is doing, and we need to step up. So it's interesting that these countries are still resistant to help those that are more vulnerable to what's impacting their parts of the world and so on. I assume that when you talk with other indigenous peoples from other parts of the world, that a lot of the issues that you're talking about is fairly common. You're not unique by any means here in Canada versus what's going on in places like Colombia and other parts of the world.
No, we are not unique at all. In fact, actually, it may be even more profound, the impacts and effects that it has on some of them because they don't have the ability to be able to have as large a voice as some of us do here. But in those other countries, we need to stand together with them because it's the indigenous communities of those places that are being the most impacted and affected, where they don't have clean drinking water and where the standard of living has diminished so badly that people's healths are always at risk. And that's not
Mhm.
acceptable in this world.
When you got back from COP16, I understand you hosted a environment conference here with the Métis as well. Métis women, the Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus community got together to talk about what you heard, what you learned, and what's next. So what is next?
Well, I know that we are going to continue to build on policies and try to have an effect and impact on the work that we've done. We're going to make sure that some of the documents and things that we created get published and get put out there so that people can understand. We also want to see more research being done because many of the plants and things that we had become a part of, we don't know that even some of those native plants even exist today in our own territory. And so we need to be able to do the research to make sure that we have clean drinking water and the plants and things that we need to do. Many of our young women that attended were talking about things like how we need to take care of even things like the garbage and how the garbage has become such a problem and we're pretending it doesn't exist, but it's really having an impact, not just here. They're shipping our garbage out to other places and there is no way with some of the footprint of the garbage that we have going on, are we ever going to be able to fix or change this in many, many generations? So those are the things some of our young people are talking about. They want to see healthy water, healthy environment, healthy plants, and healthy animals so that we can continue to exist.
Okay, Melanie Omeniho, thank you very much. President of Les Femmes Michif Otipemisiwak, thank you again for joining us today. Just before we wrap up, any final comments, any final thoughts?
No, other than the fact that thank you for giving us this opportunity to have a voice and to be able to share that the work that's being done by many of our Métis women out in our communities is really important, and we need to be able to continue to support them in that endeavor.
Absolutely. And I'd like to invite you back again in the future as well to talk about, some of the other issues that you're dealing with, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. That remains a crisis. So I think that itself deserves a discussion all by itself. So I'd like to invite you back again in the near future for that. So in the meantime, thank you everyone for joining us today. Hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. Give us a thumbs up or subscribe. And remember, we are here each week inviting special guests to talk about the Métis Nation, the people, the history, the culture, and of course, the current political state of affairs. This is Métis in Canada, the podcast.